All right, I will start by sharing my screen. Let me know, can you see that coming through now?
We can. Thank you.
Yep.
Fantastic. All right, so today I'm going to tell you all a little bit about a new product that we have called Umbraco Compose. So I am the what we call the head of orchestration at Umbraco. So I head up the team who is responsible for developing Compose, as well as Hardcore as well. So one of our other products that some of you may be familiar with, because a couple of years ago I gave a talk at this meetup. So perhaps some of you may have been there. I'm currently at HQ, Umbraco HQ here in Denmark, although I'm not originally from Denmark. I'm a New Zealander, so I moved here about 3 years ago. And yeah, so to talk about Compose, I think the first thing that I want to do is talk a little bit about the history of kind of content and content management products. So it sort of starts back in the 90s when web development was obviously a brand new field in its complete infancy. And what we started to see is that in the early days, a lot of websites were just very personal driven. People were creating their own content, and sort of the people who founded the internet as it is were kind of at that time very hobbyist and enthusiast. So they learned what they needed to do to create web pages. But pretty quickly we saw this concept of a non-technical user who wanted to be able to create content on the internet and without having to necessarily learn HTML at the time. And, obviously in the following years, eventually JavaScript and CSS and all of the other various technologies that you need to make a page evolved. But at the time, it was very much reasonably simple pages in HTML, maybe using a server-side rendering framework like PHP. And yeah, so learning this stuff and creating web pages was kind of difficult for non-technical authors. And so we started to see the emergence of homebrew kind of CMS sites where technical people would create ways for non-technical people to easily edit content. And over time, this started to turn into, kind of moving into the early 2000s now, this started to converge into actual CMS products, some of them being open source, some of them being paid. And it actually started to emerge that we would reuse the same products over and over again rather than building from scratch every time, which of course makes sense. And then kind of if we fast forward maybe another 10 years, so we're looking kind of in the 2010s now, we started to get this concept of headless emerging, where we decoupled the front end of the website from the back end, and we served the content via usually some kind of REST API or something to that effect. And that gave us a few advantages. It meant we could now quite easily serve to more than just websites. So we could serve content to mobile apps or other places because it was just JSON. And it gave us kind of this cleaner, more maintainable architecture. It let us kind of have back-end developers in one end and front-end developers in another. So it kind of gave you some potential efficiencies in workflow. And there's a lot of reasons why this happened. But we started making this transition to headless. And then over the years, those became products too. So what started out as custom development, with React and Angular JS and a bunch of other kind of technologies, eventually started turning into products specifically for doing headless. So we saw headless CMSs coming out. And then all of the other CMSs, the ones that already existed, started to add headless capability too. And this wasn't constrained just to CMS, but all products across the board. And then if you fast forward another few years, in more recent times, we've been starting to see this concept of orchestration. So as we've been talking for a number of years now about DXP and particularly composable DXP. So the idea that you can websites these days need more than just content from the CMS. They need sometimes stuff from a PIM, a product system, or from a digital asset management system, a DAM, or from your ERP. You might need to get some data out of there to display something on your website. And so like more and more, we're using all of these different products to create these web experiences. So you need to surface data from 3, 4, 5 different systems or more to show a web page. And so to start with, we saw a lot of just people building custom, in .NET or Node.js or all sorts of technologies, building these integrations between those systems. So to go and get content out of the ERP and put it in the CMS, or to go and get content out of both of them and put it in something else and then put it in the website. So there's all this custom development that's been happening. And then if we kind of fast forward to modern day, there's the emergence of products to do this. And Umbraco Compose is one of those. It's a product to help you manage the flow of content between different systems. So when we talk about Compose, this is what we often say to people. It's a software as a service, first of all, so you don't have to host it. We do that. You pay a monthly subscription fee, and then we manage all of the hosting for you so that you don't have to deal with setting that up and deploying it and all of that kind of stuff. And it's a data or a content orchestration platform. So that process we talked about before about getting content from one place and kind of pushing it out to your delivery channels, your website, your mobile app, that's what Compose is for. And it helps you aggregate and combine data from all of those sources and deliver it at scale using a content distribution network to one or more channels. And we'll talk a little bit more about what all of this means soon. But before we go there, I'd like to talk about kind of why you might want Compose. What problem does it actually solve? And we'll start with sort of a scenario. So a customer has a content management system, pretty standard, and it contains details about some pages that are on their website. They also have a product management system that stores details about their products. So the question is, and lastly, they have a website on which they want to display all of this content, right? And it could be a mobile app, but in this case, we've decided to go with website because that's probably the most common scenario. And now a marketing person at this company would like to create a landing page for a campaign that they're running. So in a couple of minutes, we'll see some more details about what that might look like. But then they want to put specific products for display on that landing page. And so to kind of put some concrete concepts in here or some concrete data in here, let's pretend that we're Umbraco. I mean, because I guess I am. And we would like to run a pretend, this is only fake, unfortunately, but let's say that we wanted to run a 2026 Umbraco Compose launch sale. And so we make a landing page for that in the CMS. And I'll actually show you what this looks like soon, but I want to talk through what the problem is that we're solving first. So we make a landing page in the CMS. And now on that page, we want to show 2026 Code Garden tickets for sale. And we want to show some 2026 commemorative Compose stickers also for sale. And notably, we shouldn't show any other products on the page. So this is the kind of scenario that I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with when you're creating websites for your clients or for yourself. This is a very, very common problem. So how do we solve it? Well, without Compose, we can kind of tell the website to get pages from the content management system, and we can tell it to get products from the product system. But this doesn't really solve the problem, because the actual problem is, how do we display some specific products on the page? Like, which specific products should we show? And in this solution, we don't have anything that lets us select those specific products. So a really common scenario, which we see all the time with customers in Hardcore, and this led to us actually creating Compose, was because we saw this problem over and over again, and this is how real customers solved it. More often than not, they would take their product management system and they would get all of the product data out of that system and they would put it into the CMS. So they would run, usually, sometimes it was in real time, other times it's like a nightly task that runs. So once a day or once every few hours, they take all of the product information and they put it into the CMS from the PIM. And then you send from the CMS information about the pages and the products that are on those pages. And so, yeah, since the CMS contains both the pages and the products, now in the back office of the CMS, customers can, or content authors can set up that link. So they can say, for this landing page, I would specifically like Code Garden tickets and commemorative stickers to appear. So they can do that in the back office of the CMS using this setup. So have we solved the problem? Well, sort of, but not really, because we've created more problems for ourselves. So first of all, we're kind of doing a bit more integration. So we need to get the PIM and the CMS talking to one another, and then we need to send the product data kind of twice to the website as well. But the bigger problem, the more important one in my mind, is the one where these non-technical content authors are now not really sure where they should edit the data. Because it's in both because products are now both in the PIM and the CMS, then that creates confusion. So what you might see in scenarios like this one, and we see this all the time because we get support tickets for this because people think it's a bug. It's not a bug. It's how agencies have designed the solution. But what we see is a non-technical person will go and edit some product information in the CMS. And now, the next time that data is synced across from the PIM, their changes get blown away. And that's really confusing. It looks like a bug to non-technical people because they just don't necessarily understand what's going on. Now, you can solve some of this with training, but it's not a great way to solve it in the long term because people leave the organization, new people come on board, people forget. You know, these are non-technical people. They don't necessarily have it in their head that this is how the whole system is working. So there's another way that we often see customers solve this problem. And that is they send the CMS, so they send pages into another component, and we're just going to call it a combiner for now. So they send pages into the combiner, and they send products into the combiner, and then in the combiner, they either have some logic to control which pages show which products, or they create an ability for content authors in the combiner to create that mapping between pages and products themselves. And this kind of doesn't really solve the problem either, because it's a bit more complex, first of all. So we're sending a lot of, there's now an extra component in the mix. We're doing some extra integration, and we have to create that combiner. But now, like, if you edit products in the PIM and pages in the CMS, and you have to edit that relationship in the combiner, then now you have to go to 3 different places to make changes. And that kind of gets confusing too. So For those of you who are a little bit more technical, sometimes we call this combiner a BFF or a backend for front end. And sometimes you change things in there, or sometimes you will just go, sometimes you'll create even more integration to kind of make things editable from the CMS, or maybe in the CMS, you have like an ID field that people need to fill out that represents the ID of the product in the PIM. So there's kind of all sorts of ways of solving this, but they're all just a little bit ugly. And that's why we made Compose. So let's look at what this scenario looks like with Compose. It's sort of like the approach where we use a combiner or a BFF, but it's slightly different. So instead of the combiner, we use Compose, and we tell the CMS and the PIM to put their data into Compose. And now the magic and the difference between the combiner and the BFF versus Compose is this part here, where we actually enable you to now see the product data from the CMS as though it were in the CMS, even though it's not. So we can tell the CMS back office, whenever you need to select a product, go and have a look at what's in Compose. And that's really powerful. We'll see that in a demo soon. And does this kind of solve the problem? Yeah, for the most part, it does. There is a bit of integration. We're still sending lots of data around, but particularly this part here, where we integrate the CMS with Compose, and particularly if you're using Umbraco CMS specifically, all of that is already taken care of for you. We have NuGet packages that you just install the package, you point them at your Compose project using a couple of lines of configuration, and then that part just works. So yes, there's a bit of integration here, but it's quite simple because we just do most of that for you. Now content authors can edit pages in the CMS, they can edit products in the PIM, and they can set up the relationship between the two in the CMS. And then Compose knows all about which ones are related to each other, and so it can display that on the website. So what kind of starts as this? Like, this is an architecture, and we've deliberately exaggerated it slightly for illustrative purposes, but this is often what we see customers set up, where they would like to deliver some content to their website and their mobile app, maybe multiple channels, and they have all of these different systems behind the scenes. You know, they've got a digital asset management, product information management, they've got a learning management system. So all of these three-letter acronyms, these are different systems from which we need to get content, and they all talk to each other behind the scenes, and they talk to the BFF or the combiner, and it's really complicated. And what we really hope that Compose can eventually enable are architectures that look more like this one, where they all push content into Compose, and then it's available in a nice combined form to the delivery channels. Now, the reality is there are going to be sometimes some of these systems are going to need to talk to each other, like we saw on the previous diagram. In some cases, you'll be able to set that up so that they go through Compose, in effect, making these arrows kind of both directions. But in some cases, you may still have to have, you know, some of these systems talking to each other behind the scenes without going through Compose. But this is kind of the ideal goal. You can see it looks a lot simpler, and in at least a lot of projects, this is the kind of architecture that we should be able to enable with Compose. Now, lastly, before we go into a demo, I'll just talk a little bit about what actually Compose is made up of, so that some of the things in the demo make a bit more sense. So Compose has three main APIs. It's a very developer-focused product. Now, that's not to say it only benefits developers, because the end goal here is that we make the lives of content authors easier. But largely it's going to be, if we've done our job really well, content authors often won't even know that Compose is there. So the product is mostly aimed at helping developers deliver these fantastic experiences. And so it's all very API driven. So we've got 3 APIs. We have a management API, and this is where you sort of set up your project. So you can create environments, you can tell Compose about the types of content that you have, you can set up webhooks, etc. So all of those kind of things to manage your project. We have what we call the ingestion API, and this is kind of the entry point for content into Compose. So in order to put any content in at all, you call this API. And it's not only for doing creation, but this is also where you change data or remove data too. And then lastly, we have a GraphQL API to get content back out of Compose. I won't talk too much about GraphQL today. Last time we had a meetup about hardcore, I talked a little bit about the advantages of GraphQL and why we generally recommend customers use that. In Compose, we've actually made it the only way to get content back out. Now, that's a little bit scary for some people because GraphQL does sound kind of scary, but trust me, I've worked with it for a few years now. If you have to create a GraphQL API, that is scary. We've done that a few times now, and it's a lot of work and it's complex. But just consuming a GraphQL API to get content back out again, that's quite easy. And we'll see how easy that can be soon when we go into the demo. And these 3 kind of applications line up with what customers, like what systems that customers have. So typically in a customer environment, you'll have 2 or 3 different types of application. Now, one of them, the no-brainer here, is a source of content. So a content management system is obviously a source of content. A PIM is a source of content. Other LMSs, all of those 3-letter acronyms we saw, that's your content sources. But in Compose, we also do need something to tell us about the content schema. So the structure of the content. Now, if you're integrating with Umbraco CMS, then Umbraco CMS already has structured document types. And so we can get the type schema from those. So Umbraco CMS in this case is actually a source of both content and type schema. In many cases, you will just want to set these up manually, these schemas. So for example, if you're creating an integration with your PIM and the content structure in the PIM doesn't really change, then setting up these type schemas is a one-time deal and you'll just do it manually. But if they're likely to change over time, then you may want to set up an automated integration with the management API. And lastly, the 3rd type of application that customers will generally bring are the consuming applications. So these are the ones that take content out of Compose. So your website, your mobile app, maybe an advertising kiosk or a billboard, all sorts of different places where you wish to display content. And then in behind the scenes, we take the type schemas out of management and the content out of ingestion. We put them into GraphQL where they're available for those applications. So it's kind of a lot of talking so far. I think it's about time that we started to take a look at this. So I think I'm sharing my whole screen. So if I fire up Bruno here, can you see that, my API tool? Fantastic. Okay, so what I have here is a pre-prepared query to get some products out of Compose. Now, I have gone and put those into Compose. We'll see how I did it in a moment, but this is how I get them out again. So this is GraphQL. I'm hitting the GraphQL API on Umbraco Compose. This is my project name. It's very creatively titled Jordan 2 because it's my second project. Who'd have thought? And I'm getting content from the production environment. There's only one environment on this project because it's actually my test project. But you can create environments, you can call them whatever you like. In this project, I've got one environment called production. And I'm saying that I would like to get content out of the products collection. So the top level of this GraphQL query is what we call the collection. It's like a folder that you put content into. And I would like to get all of the items out of that collection. And if they are a product, then I'd like to get their ID and their name. So you can see this is the result when I fire off that query. It's already showing from when I ran the query before, but I can run it again. And you can see I've got some products out of Compose. Now, if I go and have a look at the type schema for one of these products, so I'm making a query here to the management API to get out the type schema that I've created for these products. And I created this one earlier. I'm not going to do that live because it's too prone to error, but this is a type schema that I created earlier for products. And you can see it's fairly simple. We have a name for the thing. You have an optional description that you can define. And there's kind of some boilerplate here that I won't talk about too much now, but you can also see we've defined some properties on a product. So we've got a name, a quantity, and I was just kind of joking around when I created this demo. So I've got the number of lives that that product has ruined. It's all just fun and games, don't worry. We haven't really ruined lives, I would hope. And so when I query my GraphQL, I can see that, well, here I've got the name product, the name property, but I've also got a quantity and a lives ruined available. So let's go and try and change this query to like get the quantity of each product that's available as well. So all I'm going to do is fail at spelling quantity, and then I'm going to add that in there. And now you can see my GraphQL query returns the quantity of each product that's available in Compose as well. So you can see straight away that GraphQL already has this one cool advantage, which is I only get back what I request. So this payload is kept quite small because, you know, it's only 665 bytes here. It's tiny because I'm only getting back the content that I desperately need or that I've asked for. So that's products. If we have a look now so looking at these products, you can see I have a 2026 Code Garden ticket. So if you remember the example that we were going to work through is we had a landing page and we wanted to show a Code Garden ticket, and we also wanted to show a 2026 commemorative Compose sticker. And you can see I actually don't have that other product in here right now, the Compose sticker. So let's go and add that to my Compose project. So we're going to go across, and I've created this request earlier as well. This is a request to the ingestion API to create some content. And this is what it looks like when I want to create a new product. So when I want to add something to Compose, all I do is I give it an ID, and I can specify whatever I like as long as it's unique. I tell Compose that this is a product that we're ingesting. So that's the type. I tell Compose that we'd like to do an upsert, which is to say we're going to insert it if it doesn't already exist. And if it does exist, then we'll update it instead. That's what this upsert operation means. And then here's the actual product data that I would like to put in. And you'll notice in this request, I also have a second entry in this array here. And I've said for product ID 2, I would like to delete that one, because if we go and have a look at our products, product with ID 2 is actually a 2025 product, and maybe that's no longer available. So in this request to the ingestion API, I can do multiple different operations to different content items all in one batch. And there are other operations that are available here. You can do things like JSON patch and all sorts of other stuff to change the structure of your content. So if I go ahead and fire that off, and I go back and run my products query again, we should see that the 2025 product, the one with ID2, is no longer in here. And if we go, it's right here. Now we've also got a 2026 commemorative compose sticker. So the products are here. Now, I have somewhere, let's go back to this one. So I have an Umbraco CMS site running here. So let me log into the back office and I'll show you my landing page. Let's make sure I type the password correctly without caps lock. It's only running locally, so it's not a very secure password. Okay, so I've created this Umbraco site earlier, and I've just set up some basic content, but specifically I've got some campaigns. And in particular, I've got my 2026 Umbraco Compose launch sale campaign. And this is currently not published. And I've got some details about different things. This is quite a skeletal site. So there's not a whole lot here, and I haven't actually created a front end for this website, but this is what something might look like in Umbraco Compose. In Umbraco CMS when you create a landing page. And if I now go back to Bruno, we've actually got it configured such that, so I mentioned we have these NuGet packages that automatically integrate the CMS with Compose. So if I go and have a look, I've got this other GraphQL query here called getCampaign. And this one's a little more complex than the product one. We've got this where filter on it to say, only get everything out of the content collection where it's a landing page and where the name is 2026 Umbraco Compose launch sale. Now I could use an ID or I could use a URL fragment as well to power my query here, but I've chosen to just use the name for simplicity. And then I've said for each item in that collection, get its ID, and if it's a landing page, get its name, created date, its route, and some properties. And you can see at the moment, when I do that, nothing comes back because that item is unpublished. But as soon as I go into my CMS and I hit save and publish here, and I come back to Bruno and I fire off this request, now you can see I get some data. So what is happening there behind the scenes is as soon as you publish that content item, the CMS is going and sending that content into Compose. So it's now available in Compose. And you can see I asked for the meta description and the keywords properties. So those are down here. If I wanted to, I could also get out, let's try and get my main heading and my tagline, for example. So I can just go and add those here, main heading and tagline, and those should just come through. So that's cool. But now how do we combine it with products? Well, let's go back to the CMS, and you can see I've got this featured products picker here. But before we go into that, I'll show you how that works. So if I go to, whoops, not that one, up here, data types, and I go to product picker, this is a new type of picker available in Umbraco CMS. It's called the entity data picker, and it lets me pick stuff out of Compose as though it were in the CMS, even though it's not. So there is no product data stored in Umbraco CMS right now. I have simply told Umbraco, go to Compose, look at, I've set up in my app config, I've set up the Compose project already. So there's one or two extra lines of configuration you don't see here, but I've already told it, use the Jordan 2 project, use the production environment. And then I've said, on this picker, go and get me products from the products collection and go and return just the name for now. So some really simple configuration here. I'm not going to go through it in depth, but this is a new data type that I've configured for my content item here, for my landing page. And if I hit choose on featured products now, you can see that I get back the products out of Compose. And so if this is all kind of real time. So if we deleted one of those content items in Compose, then it will no longer appear here. But now I can pick the 2026 Code Garden ticket and 2026 commemorative Compose sticker, and I can save and publish those on my landing page here. And finally, the last piece of the puzzle is that now I want to go and actually get those combined so that I can power my landing page on my website. So now I can add a featured products property here. And featured products is an array, and arrays have items. So this is just one of the quirks of GraphQL. Then I want to say for everything in that array that is, whoops, other way around. For everything in that array that is a product, go and get me the name, the quantity, and maybe the lives ruined. And then if I hit the go button on this, you can see that we've got all of our page details combined with all of the properties from the products that are not in the CMS. So all of this data is in Compose, but it is not in the CMS. So hopefully that is pretty cool, because I think it is awesome. Let's go back to our slides as soon as I can find the damn things and pick up where we left off and talk a little bit more about what I've just shown you. Actually, I lied. We're going to talk about another cool feature. So we saw how to ingest content. We make this request to the ingestion API, but there's actually another way that we can do things. And that bears a lot of similarity with when you're trying to talk to another person, but maybe that person doesn't share the same set of languages with you. So this is kind of common in integration scenarios when you're integrating systems, as we'll soon see. But in this case, where the woman on the left can only speak Vietnamese and English, and the one on the right can speak Portuguese, so how do these people have a conversation with each other? Well, once upon a time, they would have had to go through a translator, someone who knows at least one language from the left and at least one language on the right. And that person can interpret or translate and be the go-between for these people to have a conversation. But in the modern day, particularly with the rise of AI, it's now really, really, really easy to just use a cell phone or a smartwatch or any number of devices and just largely have that device do the translation for you. And this is more and more starting to happen in real time with audio. And so we've kind of cut out the translator in this case, because now the translation, if you will, is kind of built into all of us through these devices that we're carrying around. And the ingestion functions in Compose, what they are is they are a managed piece of JavaScript that actually runs inside Compose. And then you can point webhooks from other applications at those ingestion functions. Now, what that means is normally when you integrate a data source to Compose, you would need to have a middleman. You would need to have that translator that takes the data from whatever format that this application speaks and translates it into something that Compose understands. But with ingestion functions, they run inside Compose, and you can kind of think of them as that cell phone. So you can just have your data source, you point it straight at an ingestion function, and the ingestion function inside of Compose does the translation of the data to a format that Compose understands. And that means you don't need to host this extra middleman integration. So it keeps your costs down and makes it easier to develop. I'm coming to the end now. We're running out of time, so I'll talk a little bit more about some of the features in Compose and then what's on the roadmap. And then if we've got any time left at the end, we can talk about some Q&As if anyone's got questions. So we saw the GraphQL API. That's how you get content out of Compose. We have this concept called persisted queries. So you can actually save a piece of GraphQL and just give it a name. And then when you call the server, you can say, please run me the get products query, for example. And that just makes working with them a little bit easier because you can kind of name them and you can reuse them a lot easier without having to manage that in your client application. We have webhooks. So whenever you send content into Compose, we can then fire a webhook and send content to another system to say, hey, Compose just received this, we've updated it. Now you do your part. So those webhooks are there. We talked just now about ingestion functions, and we saw the CMS integration. So whenever you change anything in the CMS, we automatically forward that to Compose. And whenever you update data in Compose, you can just go and pick it out of the CMS. Compose also has some very kind of heavy caching on the APIs, and we use a CDN to make content available really fast from all over the globe. So the GraphQL API is very, very highly scalable, and you don't have to worry about anything like load balancing or anything like that because we've done that for you. And we also have a UI that I think I'm a little out of time, so I won't go into it, but we've got some UI to help you diagnose the content that you've ingested and make sure that it's, see what's going wrong when you've ingested some content and stuff like that. So there is a little bit of UI available for the product, although as we've seen, it's fairly developer-centric. And currently on the roadmap, just these are some of the big items. We are adding small value adds to Compose all the time, but some of the big items are we're going to create a US region. I know it may not be a big thing for everyone on this call, but eventually the intention is to create more Compose regions for customers who have requirements around data sovereignty. So where you might have a customer who isn't allowed to have their content stored in any other region, they have to have it specifically in the US or in the EU. So the goal is to have multiple delivery regions. So even though we've got that global CDN, you can still choose where your data sits when it's at rest. Obviously, AI is a huge topic these days, and we've got a proof of concept MCP server for Compose, particularly for the GraphQL API. It's not live yet, but we're working hard to make that ready for customers. I mentioned the ingestion functions that can transform the payload of data that comes into Compose. We've also got a plan to do the same thing when you send data from Compose via webhooks, so that if you wish to wire up a search provider, for instance, so you've got a search provider that operates over everything in Compose. Eventually, we hope to have an integrated search provider or options to bring your own. But in the early days, we think that the search story is best covered by you send webhooks, and then you can use an outgoing function or an outbound function to translate the payload for your search provider. And then we have some plans to kind of enhance the ingestion experience so that we notify you proactively, for example, when you've ingested some content that maybe doesn't match the type schema, or there's other problems with your content. Maybe you've marked a property as mandatory, but it's null when you've actually ingested the content. So we have some plans to kind of proactively warn you about things like that. And there are a whole lot more plans. We have only so many people, and we have a lot of things that we'd like to do with this product. So we've got a roadmap for a while. But yeah, keep an eye on the space. And I guess at this point, I'm conscious of time. So let's move on and see if anyone has any questions about the product. And Nikhil, if we need to be cut short or anything like that, feel free to call time on it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Jordan. I think it really helps what the compose capability is. The first question I would have, like, sometimes we are using engage as a personalization. So now let's assume we have the data is coming from the multiple sources, and we have to make some dynamic in with the orchestration. So how we can align that? Like, that is the
Yeah.
first thing.
That's
Yeah.
a good question. We're still trying to figure out internally what the best way to use Compose and Engage together is. So
Okay.
Compose does have the concept of variants. So those can be
Yeah.
language
Okay.
variants, or they can be segment, variations by segment, or different variations of the content that you want to show to different segments.
Okay.
And what we have seen internally is people are trying to create a POC where you kind of tell Compose, you have Compose kind of reach back out to Engage to figure out like what segment a given customer
Okay.
belongs to. And then from then on, Compose will serve, content relevant to that segment. So there's some kind of proof of concepting and stuff going on. I wouldn't say that we're quite at the level where I would recommend Compose and Engage together at this stage. We're
Together.
working towards it, and it will happen, but we're not quite there yet.
Yeah. But yeah, I think as the first step toward the compose, I think it has covered a lot of things, because initially we have to stay with the Beam core and other some third parties to get in. And now it's a good advantage that everyone is under one umbrella, which is Umbraco. So that's good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you sort of mentioned like lots of different products. One thing that I didn't really go into much, but Compose can be used in situations to help you avoid being stuck with one given product, for example. So if you would like to change out your PIM for a different PIM, then all you need to do is change that integration with Compose rather than, maybe 5 different integrations with 5 other different systems. So there's a scenario in which this can be really helpful for managing those different products.
Okay. And do we have any analytics, like once it's connected with Compose with our third party PIMs? So do we have any kind of analytics dashboard to see something?
Yeah, at the moment we're capturing a lot of that information, but we're
Okay.
not exposing it on a dashboard. So that's something that will also be
Okay.
coming at this stage. Yeah, I'm confident that the product very much is useful to start building projects
Exactly.
with now, but some of those kind of things like analytics and stuff like that are still very much coming.
Okay. So that's a good, I think. So it's in roadmaps, and then it's very good, I guess.
Yeah, so we
Anyone
capture
else?
data about whenever you ingest content, and we capture a lot of. So, for example, one thing that might happen is if you try and if you have data that doesn't match your type schema. So let's say you say something should be an array, but then you just provide it with a string when you actually ingest the content. Then at the moment, what happens is that field will just be returned as null. So, if it doesn't match the type that you said it was going to be in the type schema, then we return null. But in future, we will also kind of proactively warn you about that on a dashboard where you can see here are all of the potential issues with your content that you might want to investigate.
Got it. Understood. Yeah, I think I've cleared my all the questions. Anyone else from the meetup team?
Just a general pricing question. Are you sort of charging per data source or amount of data, or sort of how does it work?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we wanted to avoid things like data source, because all it really does is encourages people to build wonky architectures. Same thing with like seat-based pricing, so per user pricing. All it does is it gets people to log in with one account and kind of encourages bad practices, right? And data sources is kind of similar. We can't actually tell. Like, you can tell us this is coming from the PIM and this is coming from the CMS, but if you decide to tell us that, hey, this is all coming from one system, we don't have any way of telling that. So in terms of pricing, we have two tiers. So we have a pro and an enterprise tier. I don't remember the exact specifics for regional currencies, but the pro tier is something in the ballpark of €1,000 a month. Enterprise is about 4 times that. This is kind of generally aimed at larger clients where you have a lot of different systems coming into play. So that pricing we think is competitive amongst our competitors. And then in terms of so that's kind of the base price, and we've included there is some consumption pricing. The value on which we charge you is the number of ingestions, because that's kind of what costs us compute. Because when you change content, we need to go and clear out caches, and then we have to rebuild. Whenever you query for that content again, that's when we kind of rebuild that cache. So that's what costs us, is when content changes. And so that's kind of what we pass on to customers. And so off the top of my head, I believe that the pro plan is like 30,000 ingestions a month. So you can change 30,000 content items. And then the enterprise plan is maybe 5 or 10 times that. I don't remember exactly.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for that.
No worries.
Again, thank you so much, Jordan. I guess it's time to say goodbye and see you soon in Code Garden. Just to
No worries. Thank you for having me. And
Thank
yeah,
you.
we'll see some of you at Code Garden.
Okay, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.